Hello, hello. So this short video is going to go over the basics of this concept of show, don't tell. I mean, this idea that we want to show, we want to help the reader be immersed in our story, in our writing, in the setting, right? Versus just directly telling them. So changing this direct or telling narration, right, in a writing to descriptive, figurative language, sometimes it's called like flowery, right? The idea here is we don't want to just say something like, she was mad, right? Very direct, very telling the reader what to think. We want the reader to kind of have to infer things themselves. So we want to think about what are the characters' actions? What are their thoughts? What are they sensing? What are they feeling? How does that look, right? How does that feel? Here, all of our senses. So you can see here, this goes from she was very mad to now we have a little paragraph here of thinking about what would her mouth be doing, her stomach, her feet, her heart, her hands, her eyes, right? What does that look like to us? Instead of just saying what she's feeling, show us, right? What does it look like? So her eyes narrowed as she glared at me. She pursed her lips together tightly. Hot lava began to form deep in her stomach. She put her hands on her hips. She stomped up the stairs and slammed the door, and she immediately became a fire-breathing dragon, right? So you can see here in this little box, it says another technique is to use some of that figurative language, where here we describe what she looks like, but then we end it with saying it is a metaphor or simile, right? She becomes a fire-breathing dragon because she's hot, heated, and upset here. So things to think about. Another thing to consider with show don't tell is the words we use to describe things. So we have our adjectives, which modify nouns, right? Person, place, thing. So thinking about this thing is purple. It's tall, it's round, it's slippery, right? A lot of describing what a noun looks like, feels like, what colors is it. And then same thing with actions of our characters. We can use adverbs, right, to modify a verb. So examples being like, they quickly moved, they barely moved, they cheerfully moved, they sadly moved, right? A lot of adverbs are going to have that ly, right, saying that how did they do something, right? So we have another example here of our little robot man, right, saying he was petrified, right? That's very direct, telling the reader how the character thinks and feels. But we could show, what does the face look like? What does the body? How do they sound, right? Using those adjectives, using those different senses. So saying his eyes were wide with fright, his mouth opened in horror, his knees were shaking, and he covered his face with his hands. He spoke slowly, and his voice quivered. He could barely get out a few words, all right? So it's a lot of sentences, a lot of imagery there, but we don't have to come out and say he was scared, he was petrified. Already, the way it looks, we can infer that, all right? So can have some practice here of some images to give you an idea with this kind of bland sentences here of the house was old. No one liked going there after the last folks moved out. All right. And depending how you describe it, you could have the house was creepy and eerie, the windows creaked and rattled. All right. Or you could have something like the house was very cheery. It was out in the woods. There was a strange lady who used to live there. All of those kinds of things work very different imagery depending on those adjectives and adverbs that you decide to use to show rather than tell. So give it a chance in your next writing, and it will be way more immersive and interesting for your reader if you use some of that show don't tell.